it good?
It's good.
Okay. Well, let's get started. Welcome to Glass Crafters. My name is George, and I'm going to talk today about glass cutting saws. I have two models on the table. I have the Gemini Taurus 3 ring saw, and I have the Griffin C40 Diamond Band Saw. These saws are similar in a couple of important ways. That is, they both use diamond grit that's been plated to a metal blade to do the cutting. So in that case, it's not really cutting, it's just grinding. It's grinding through the material. So these saws can cut not only glass, but tile, or bone, or antler, or any other dense mineral-based material. They can grind through it. They both use water. So these are water-cooled. That also cleans the blade and keeps it lubricated. In both cases, the water is in a reservoir in the base of the machine, and the blade just picks up the water as it spins around. So there's no extra pump or sponge system so much to worry about. But the parts do wear out, and so the first thing I want to work on today is I want to show you how we change the blade on each of the saws, and then once I get them put back together, we'll actually demonstrate how to use them to cut a piece of glass. I'm going to start with my Taurus 3 ring saw. This is one that somebody brought into me and said that they'd like to have the blade and the belt reseated and replaced. So we're going to start there. Step one, make sure the machine's unplugged. The Taurus 3 work surface pops off the front, and then the saw lifts out of the tub. There's a little widget on the back that needs to be depressed in order for it to release from the clamp on the back of the tub. My saw, that's been broken off because we've taken it out of the tub so many times. So the way this Taurus 3 ring saw operates, let me take off the face shield. Is the belt runs through this fairly elaborate pulley system with the blue pulleys. Can you see me?
I can.
And the blade is actually driven by the belt. It's in direct contact with the belt, and that's how it drives around the machine. So in general saw maintenance, I recommend you clean it out from time to time and spray each of the pulleys, the bearings, with a silicone lubricant. If something's frozen, then I like to use the PB Blaster. This is the best product I've found to help release stuck items.
And what do you actually spray? All
The
those
bearings.
All of them?
So where each of these screw heads are on the Taurus 3, there's a bearing that's supposed to roll as the blade and the belt go around. And if they get frozen, and they will from just drying out or from the grit from the glass, it makes a little cementous paste that gets into everything, and the things freeze up. If you can't get them to roll freely, that one's rolling freely, even with the lubricant, then it's time to replace it. So to remove the blade and the belt from this saw, I only have to loosen one screw. The screw on this orange groove grommet, on the back of the orange grommet, has to be loosened. And then it slides out of the way and gives me enough leeway to lift everything out. I also like to take out the stabilizer foot because it's holding on pretty tightly too. Not strictly necessary, but it certainly is more convenient to have that guy out of the way. If it's stuck, spray it with a little PB Blaster. Just didn't want to let go. All right, we're going to let that sit for a minute. As a compromise, I'll take off the blue pulley on the top to give myself a little more free play. to get the blade and the belt out. So this blade doesn't look so badly worn.
That goes on the bottom shelf out here.
I think we can use it again. The belt doesn't look torn. What I'm looking for here is in the groove in the belt where the blade runs to see if I can actually see any of the Kevlar fibers exposed to indicate that the belt is terribly worn. And that looks fine. It may be that it's stretched over time, and we'll see that when we get it put back together and turn it on and see if it runs well. If it doesn't run, if it binds up again, then we'll take a look at replacing the belt. I do have a new belt on hand, and so another measure could be just to try to hold the two belts side by side and see if the old one's any longer, stretched out. It may be a quarter of an inch stretched, but that's not bad. I'm going to save the new belt for now. Something I am noticing, however, that does need to be replaced are these orange groove grommets. And I'm glad we had the chance to do this because this is an important part of repairing the Taurus 3. The orange grommets are the things that wear out most frequently. This is where when you push against the blade to cut something, it's the orange grommet really that's pressing back. And they wear out more rapidly than any other component.
How do you know when they're wore out?
You're going to see in just a second just how deep of a groove is in that grommet.
What's it supposed to look like?
Right.
Oh, really?
Right.
Huge difference.
So it's supposed to be a very narrow groove that holds onto the blade firmly. And when they get worn, it allows too much wobble in the blade, and that could be exactly what contributed to this one coming off track. So I want to point out that when I took these orange grommets off, that they're the same part, the orange grommet on the bearing, but they were in here backwards. One way and one the other. Or they were in opposites. And the internal one behind the blade also has a bushing. So don't lose that bushing. It needs to go back in when you put your grommet back on. So there was a nut on the back side of this screw on the back side of the machine. So keep track of the nut also. That's the small head screw that goes on the bearing in the back behind the blade. And it was a larger screw that goes on the bearing in front of the blade. Now these can be quite challenging to get off, which is why I brought the box cutter, because they don't often pop right off. They've been super glued on at the factory, and we're going to want to super glue the new one back on as well.
It's too bad they don't supply the whole thing.
You can buy the orange grommet on the bearing. It's much more convenient and quicker to put back together, but more expensive. The bearing is reusable, so I'm just going to slip the new one on there. No, I'm not. I'm going to pause and put a dab of super glue on it. There she is. Okay. Just a dot to help keep the grommet in place. So that one can go back on. It was the one with a larger screw head in the front of the blade. And it should spin freely. This is the one that goes in the back that needs the bushing. And then a screw, and then into the nut.
When you buy one of these, does it have instructions?
It does. In fact, it's got a great little video with the mad scientist guy doing all these same things. So again, I want to make sure that all the blue pulleys are spinning freely and the orange groove grommets are spinning freely. Since I've got it open, I'll go ahead and dab them with some silicone lubricant, because that's how I think you should do it. Now normally I wouldn't take this blue pulley off the top, but because the stabilizer foot was giving me trouble, I'm going to leave it off for now. Once I get the belt and the blade back on, I'll put it back in as well. So the blade looked good and the belt looked good. I'm just going to put it back together with those parts, and then we'll get it to run. And if it comes off track again, we'll take it apart a second time.
What do you look for on the blade to know the blade's worn out?
Well, here, take a look. I'm looking for the diamond grit to be all the way around.
Oh, okay.
Typically the blades get worn out on the front first, just from use. It's just our natural tendency to press from the front to the back, and we wear out the grit on the front of the blade before any place else. But it still looks pretty evenly coated to me.
Yeah, it's been working well.
These saws will dull, and they'll start to run slower when they're dull. You might get frustrated with that and tend to push harder to make the saw work the way it did when it was new, and that leads to disaster, breaking blades and jamming up the machinery. So when it starts to slow down, it's just time to get a new blade. Another test for the blade is to make sure it's still round and flat. Just by placing it on a flat table, it still looks round and flat. Now I'm wearing my safety glasses more because they have a little magnifying lens on the bottom half of the glasses.
Cool.
And that I expect that machine to hurt me right now. I'll move on to the foot first. So the big blue pulley is actually the drive gear coming from the motor, and that's where the teeth of the belt slot into the drive gear. And all the blue pulleys is the smooth side of the belt. And the last one that go in is the one on the bottom, which has the tension spring on it. And I'm going to slide that inside orange grommet over until it's snug and tighten it down. So the blade should be running through the 2 orange grommets and the belt around all the pulleys. Then before we plug it in, give it a turn by hand. That seems to be rolling nicely. So now the top cover goes back on. It just snaps in place. It doesn't work the first time, you know, get a hammer.
How did you get that off?
I pulled on it from down here.
Okay.
It's just got a couple of tabs
Yeah.
that snap on.
Now I hit that bottom with the hose when I'm emptying it and cleaning it. Is that a good idea? Like I hold it up like this and kind of squirt that
In here?
Yeah.
Sure. I would warn you against getting the motor immersed.
Right. No. Yeah.
But pulling the machine out of the tub from time to time and washing out the grit in the bottom of the tub is a good idea. I recommend that you take it outside and wash it out with your hose, because you don't really want all that grit in your drain pipe, or it might clog up your house plumbing system. And the last thing I put on is the face shield. Then it pops back into the tub. And the work surface pops back on.
What about those little spinny things in the front there?
That's the red gear grommets that are part of the stabilizer foot, but I was fighting so hard with because I couldn't get the stabilizer foot to come off to get the blade to roll back through.
Do those wear out too?
They do, but not nearly as quickly as the orange ones.
Okay.
And the stabilizer foot has been a recent addition just to help shorten up the length of exposed blade that could be a little bendy or wobbly. The saw runs just fine without it. You can take it off and run the saw without a stabilizer foot altogether. So this little hole can be your water filler hole, or it's just a nice little place to grab to pull it off. I'm going to fill it up with some water. There's a fill line on the outside of the case. If that sticker comes off, and it's just a sticker, then use that little screw head on that tension arm pulley, the lowest blue pulley. You want to fill it up with water just to that screw head. And my tubs of water I've got left in the other room. So, thank you,
Like
Gina.
that, do it again, screw head.
The lowest blue pulley,
Okay.
the lowest screw head, that's your water fill line. It matches the height that's shown on the front of the tub.
Okay.
Here she comes. Thank you very much. Do not run the saw without water. Yep. One jug will do it. Now I want you to be sure to have your safety glasses on, just in case something happens. Make sure it's off. And plug it. Hey! It works! So here's a sample little piece of glass that we've been cutting up with the saw. And you can see it can make very intricate shapes. Because it has grit all the way around that round cross section on the blade, it can cut forwards, backwards, left and right, and every angle in between to follow your pattern line and make very intricate shapes. I would recommend that you try really hard to cut in all directions in order to wear out the grit evenly, so that it doesn't wear out on the front first, the way it tends to. But also be gentle with it. Allow the saw to do the grinding, because that's all it's doing is grinding the material away. You cannot make it go faster by pushing harder. It is strongest pulling from the back to the front, because you have all that strength and resistance of the orange grommet, the belt, the blade itself, that round hoop the blade's made out of to resist your pressure. It is weakest pushing to your right, because that's where those two orange grommets are just pinched together, and if you are pressing hard to the right, it can pop out of the grommets.
Looks like it's
Well,
working.
the problem coming that way is it's hard to see your mark on the glass, harder to see your mark.
See what you're doing.
Pushing this way, you can see where you're going. So I tend to go the other way.
There you go.
Is that bad?
No, well, it just means you're going to wear out the grit on the front first.
Yeah. Well, I go sideways, but
Yeah,
you say
good to go.
don't come to the right.
Don't
That-
push hard coming to the right.
To
That's
the right.
that's the weakest point.
Yeah,
of the saw.
okay, well, that's good to know.
The stabilizer foot, for all the good that it does helping to stabilize the blade from
Yeah,
wobbling or having freedom to bend, is that it also impedes your view.
yes.
There- So we tend to flip the work surface up, the face shield up, we take the stabilizer foot off so we can see what we're doing. This little face shield does not substitute for your safety glasses, you still need safety glasses. It's really just helping any spray or grit that might fly up into your face.
Yeah.
The nice thing about the Taurus is that it has that little light right up there. So there's your prop, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
I don't need those.
You trust it. Well, it was amazing to see the difference in that. The blade's okay.
The blade's okay, the belt's okay, the grommets are just worn out.
Well, it's had a lot of use. It doesn't owe me anything, that saw.
That's terrific. All right, let's move on and talk about the bandsaw. This is the C40 Diamond Band Saw. So named, I understand, because of the C shape with the upper and lower wheels, and 40 because it goes 40 miles an hour. Similar to the Taurus 3-ring saw we were talking about, it has diamond grit on a metal blade. So it's just grinding its way through the material, just like the other one. The blade is thinner, so one of the things I like about this saw is that it goes faster because it's having to grind through less material because it's thinner.
The blade is thinner.
The blade is thinner. Yep. So again, to check it out, we're going to unplug it.
You can only use that for straight cuts, though?
It can make very intricate curved cuts, not as tight a curve as the Taurus, which can make an inside circle just the diameter of the blade. You can go in and come back out again. But you can still make a 1/4 inch
Wow.
curve with that little bandsaw. And we'll do that in just a minute. So I popped the work surface off. I'm going to pop the front cover off. So this saw operates with a direct drive. The motor drives the upper wheel. There's no belt. The lower wheel is just a guide wheel. No power to the lower wheel at all. And it comes from the factory tuned and set for the blade that's on it. You shouldn't have to ever adjust the lower wheel. To take this blade off, I'm just going to lift up on the motor unit. There's a spring inside the case. Lift up, and then the blade will just pop off the front. You take it off from the lower wheel, and there it is. You can see there's just a little bit of diamond grit plated to the front of the blade.
How long does this last versus that? It doesn't look like there's that much on there.
They both last about 100 hours cutting glass. Of course, you can wear it out more quickly by pushing harder, by accidentally running it dry, by cutting denser materials or thicker materials. So the fusers that are cutting excuse me, double thick or triple thick glass, of course, it's going to wear the blade out more quickly.
But 100 hours is an average for both of them.
cutting travertine or marble tile for countertop, it's going to wear the blade out more rapidly. But you can accommodate those thicker and denser materials just by going more slowly, allowing the blade.
So would you get a heavier blade for some material like that?
And we do have what's called a fuser's blade for this saw, which is thicker and stiffer and stronger to help maintain the blade cutting a straight cut. But it's still about 100 hours for the diamond grit. So what wears out most rapidly on this saw are these two little white blocks that are the blade guides. Because again, this is what's resisting the pressure as you're pushing on the front of the blade, is these little Teflon plastic blocks on the back that are resisting your pressure. And that's what these are. We've got a little slot in them already. And they're just a friction fit. They just pop into these upper and lower blade guide arms. You just pry them out with a narrow screwdriver. And then press them. There's one upper and one lower. Yep. Okay. You get a set of 4. So you have 2 sets. So
Well,
those are
how
your
long
blade
do
guide
those
guides.
last by comparison to the blade?
Well, since you get 4 of these with the saw and 1 blade with the saw, the ratio is kind of
Okay.
2 sets for 1. Yep. But just watch out for it. It's the slot getting deeper is not such a problem, but if it starts to get wallowed out left and right, it's not going to help the blade track so well. All right, so I'm going to put this blade back on.
Seems like a simpler mechanism, the whole thing.
Right.
No belts.
No belt. Right. Still doing it backwards is a challenge. Now this one does have a couple of sponges just to help with the splatter. So one sponge, the upper sponge slides into a slot here on the upright on the machine, right behind the blade. And what these are going to do is help to clean some of the grit and the water off as the blade spins around. The second longer sponge actually goes under the lower wheel, filling that gap basically between the wheel and the bottom of the case. And then we're going to fill this one with water. Did you give me the second jug already? That was very thoughtful of you. Thank you. And the fill line here is just to cover the sponge that's under the lower wheel. Too much water will just splash around a bunch. So it's sort of self-healing. Once it's splashed around and threw all the extra water out, it's not overfull anymore. Again, I'm just going to turn by hand to make sure it's all tracking. And put the cover back on.
Is this yours that you use here?
Yes. So you can see we have had students be a little overzealous and push the blade a bit too far from time to time. Ready?
Ready?
A lot of water.
So a bit too much water. But like I said, it's self-healing. It'll disperse the extra water. Now only cutting from the front to the back on the saw. But I can still cut pretty tight curves. these saws cannot hurt you on the front of the blade, because it's just diamond grit. It's just going to be abrading. They will cut your fingernails very nicely. And of course you can rub against the side of the blade to help grind something. Oh, did you get in the water zone over there?
I was in the water zone, yes.
So as you're cutting, following your pattern line, if you didn't quite get there, you can still use the saw to dress it up and clean it up.
It's quieter.
It is a little
Have all those
quieter.
pulleys, I guess.
Mhm.
So which of the two do you prefer and why?
The little bandsaw is my favorite saw. One reason is I am just accustomed, I guess, to pushing from the front to the back. That makes just more sense to me. Having taken wood shop and metal shop in school, that's how I learned to cut things. But I like that it's simpler, that there is no belt, and I like that it cuts faster. And I don't often cut something quite that small. But the saw is a great way to make the most use of your glass, especially if you only have a little bit of glass left and you need every piece of it for your project. Use the saw to preserve it. And also, of course, the difficult cuts and the heavily textured glass that is hard to cut with a glass cutter anyway. So I don't go to the saw for every cut, certainly. Still do a lot quicker just by scoring and snapping. But when it comes to the difficult shapes, the expensive glass, the last piece of glass.
If you broke it 3 times,
Yep.
3 times is my magic number.
Then I go to the saw.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what's the difference in the pricing on the different saws?
This one's a little bit less expensive. The blades are about the same cost. I would say lifetime cost of ownership is about the same. And they're both very nice products. I think we probably sell just as many of the Taurus 3-ring saws as we do the C40 Diamond Band Saws. The Taurus 3 has a couple of advantages. It's got that nifty little light right at the work surface we talked about. It's not plugged in, is it? So I can't show you the light. And there are many more blades available for the Taurus 3. There's a mega blade for cutting dense tile, a slicer blade, a speed blade, and a separating blade. Now that's something that is unique to the ring saw. It has a blade you can actually pull open. So you could do an inside cut on a piece of glass or a piece of tile, say with your core drill. Pull the blade apart on the saw, slip the piece of glass or tile over it, put it back together, make an inside cut for whatever shape you're working on, pull it apart and slide it out again. No lead-in cut. No such thing for the bandsaw. No separating blade. That is unique only to the ring saw. There are also, of course, other brands and models of bandsaws and ring saws. Yes.
I have Cynthia, who just started viewing. She saw the saw behind you. So I think she bought an Omni, a used Omni, and she has no idea how to use it or maintain it. She wanted you to talk a little bit about the Omni.
Okay, we'll get to the Omni saw in just a moment then. I was just going to say about the bandsaws.
Appointment up at the Apple
Diamond
store,
Tech
so
makes the Diamond
going
Laser
in.
3000
I've got another piece
XL
of glass.
bandsaw, which is red in color. Uses the same size blade, operates much the same way. The blades from the different manufacturers are interchangeable from the Diamond Tech to the Griffin brand.
Now, what about the water spray? I mean, a dog, obviously there's a lot of water coming
That
out
was too much water.
versus that, yeah.
I overfilled it.
Oh, okay.
I joked that it was self-correcting, but it truly is. Because once enough water sprays out, it'll calm down.
Oh, okay.
There's a Precision 2000 hobby saw made by Diamond Tech. Uses the same 37-inch blade. They also ship that saw with a wood cutting blade, so it's got teeth on it. And there's a metal cutting blade with smaller, finer teeth on it. Those same blades, the metal cutting blade and the wood cutting blade, can be used on the Griffin, can be used on the other models of saws that take 37-inch blades. You just run them dry in that case. which means that you're going to wear out the plastic parts faster. So it's not particularly advisable to use these saws for wood cutting and metal cutting too often. But you can, if in your workshop you want to have just one saw for all those uses, they can do it all. There's also a bigger saw called the Dominator 5000. We've got one of those in our wet shop. We like to cut with taller things because when you get to 4 inches tall, like to cut bottles, the C40 Band Saw cannot cut a regular wine bottle. It's just not tall enough. Now you can get the bottle to the front of the blade and turn it. This is a little Coke bottle, but the idea is that you could get to the front of the blade and turn your bottle into the blade, and you could cut a beer bottle or a wine bottle with a saw quite well. Not so with the ring saw. Even if I take the stabilizer foot out with 1.5 inches worth of blade being exposed, I just can't get the bottle to the blade. There's too much of the housing, the mechanism on the top of the machine to get there. So there's an advantage of the bandsaw over the ring saw. It can cut bottles. We do have a taller version called the C40 Tall that has a 4.5 inch clearance, so a wine bottle can go straight through it. That's similar to the Diamond Laser 5000. It has a 4 inch clearance. Then there's a big freestanding Diamond Laser 7000, which has an 8 inch blade height clearance. Okay, let me get on to talking about the Omni Saw.
Is the other purple one also a Taurus? It looks kind of the same. What's some?
That's the Zephyr,
Oh, okay.
and it is very similar technology to the Taurus, but it's a Griffin brand, just like the C40 Band Saw and the Omni Saw. Those all three are Griffin brand saws. So that's the Zephyr. You can see it sitting here side by side against the Taurus. They look very much the same, and they operate very much the same. The folks at Griffin, I think, even readily admit that they were copying the Taurus, but they claim they made it better. They put the motor under the table. See the Taurus saw, the motor sitting above the table. This one is underneath, but the innards of the saw run very much the same. It's the same sort of a belt running around the pulleys and the drive gear. More water, yeah.
Is that hurt this Homa soap?
That's Homa soap, yeah.
Does the water hurt?
Oh yeah, it'll soak in. Maybe I should get a towel and mop it up.
No, I was just wondering if it made it fall apart. The Homa soap.
And a towel appears.
How much
So-
does one of you cost?
Very similar in design. Bigger blade, 7-inch diameter blade, versus the 5 3/4 inch blade on the Taurus. A little bit less expensive to own, only because the machine is a little bit less expensive to start with. It comes with a second blade, and the replacement parts are a little bit lower cost. But mechanically, it's much the same. But we have digressed from our mission to talk about the Omni Saw. The Omni Saw is also a multi-directional cutting saw. But the blade in this case is a straight stick, like a scroll saw, that just goes up and down, instead of the ring saws where the blade's going around and around. but it does have grit all the way around the blade so it can cut in all directions. The Omni saw must be filled with a whole lot more water. It's got to come up above the lower blade guide in order for it to be full. And in this case, there's actually a little hydraulic pump in the bottom of the machine that the blade goes up and down on top of and pumps the water up through this little hose to deliver water to your work surface. And it can take a few minutes for that pump to get going, so be patient and allow it time to bring the water up. But again, fairly inexpensive to own and operate because the replacement pieces are quite inexpensive. You get 3 blades in a pack for $25,
How much is the Taurus for
$90.
one?
Yes.
I'm just waiting for the water to start to pump. There you go. Now this is the largest diameter blade of the group that we've looked at today. So it is the slowest cutting. But again, it's just grinding through. So if you be patient and allow it to do its work, it can cut very intricate shapes. With the finger guard in place, you only have a 1/4 inch clearance. So it really is limited just to stained glass use. Whereas the other saws we talked about today are good for even tile cutting, which is much thicker, 3/8 inch or 1/2 inch thick material.
Why is it so loud? Is that the way it's supposed to sound?
That's how it goes, yeah.
Wow.
The
George,
things that wear out, yes?
are the blades difficult to replace? Is there lubrication necessary for the moving parts?
Okay. Make sure it's unplugged. Take the front cover off.
I gotta run. Thank you, George.
You're welcome. So the way the saw is working is the blade is chucked into this upper chuck that is sliding on these 2 arms, and is being driven up and down by this offset arm that's connected to the motor on top. So again, no belt, but we have this drive arm. This is the place that you need to lubricate. These 2 metal shafts need a good sturdy, like silicone grease, lithium grease, non-water based machine grease, so that the blade chuck will continue to slide up and down easily. Replacing the blades requires you to move the chuck down so that this little plastic nut can be reached in between the upper blade guard and the chuck. So the machine comes with a little wrench that I had in my hand a moment ago because I knew I was going to show you how to do this. Here it is. So the wrench slides in between the upper blade guide and the aluminum block, and you loosen from right to left in this case. And this is to release the blade from the chuck. We have had some questions and concerns from customers in the past who have been frustrated that the wrench doesn't seem to fit. I can't get it to the chuck. And I think what's happening there is they're trying to reach the chuck up here in between the 2 metal vertical guides, and it won't work. You've got to go under that block. And now you can see the nuts off completely, and I just pull the blade down. The upper blade guide is slotted, so the idea is you can pull it out from the blade guide. Or just pull the blade guide out. And the blade comes up out of the lower blade guide and out of the pump. So the pump's way down in the bottom, then there's a lower blade guide, an upper blade guide, and then into the chuck on the top. It is painted at the top, so when you get your pack of 3 blades, you'll see one end has red paint on it. That goes up. Paint goes up. So putting the new blade in, the blade guide's supposed to be in place. And I slide down into the lower blade guide, into the water pump in the bottom, press into that slot in the upper blade guide, and it pops in place. Get the nut started back in the chuck. And slide the blade up into the chuck. So again, with the rotor all the way down, I can tighten the nut. This is just a friction fit. It's just plastic parts. They're not meant to be super tight. The blade chuck is the item that most frequently gets broken and gets replaced. And I think that mostly comes from trying to over-tighten that nut in frustration trying to get it to hold onto the top of that blade. But it's not a very expensive part. You can take it off with a little pin, slide it off the top, put a new chuck on, and go back to work. The blade guides don't often need replacing. The pumps often are replaced. Again, I think it's out of frustration that it's not pumping well enough, and so we assume there's a problem with the pump. But there may not. But since the parts are inexpensive, it is truly an inexpensive tool to own and operate. This saw also has a battery-powered light inside. Flip on with the switch to illuminate your work surface. It's a red light. So again, cutting very slowly compared to the other saws,
2 of those.
but be patient with it and you'll get
Plus
it
the
done.
labor. Sir, how much do we owe you?
You owe me for a pack of orange grommets.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that is my talk on glass cutting saws.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.